morning and welcome to the Wasserman Daily News. I'm your host Rachel.
And I'm your co-host Stephanie.
Today we're going to be touching on the subjects of the post-500 Mediterranean era.
Oh yes, we will.
Starting us off this morning will be Alex talking about the life of Muhammad.
Thank you, Rachel and Stephanie. Muhammad was born in the year 570 in the town of Mecca. He is known as a religious, political, and military leader who unified Arabia into a single religious polity under Islam. The name Muhammad derives from the Arabic verb hamda, which means to praise or to glorify. He was the first and only son of Abda Allah bin al-Muttalib and Amna bint Wa. Abda Allah died before Muhammad's birth, and so Muhammad was raised by his mother until she died when he was 6. Muhammad became an orphan and was brought up under the care of his uncle Abu Talib. He began working mostly as a merchant and a shepherd, and was first married by the age 25. Being in the habit of periodically retreating to a cave in the surrounding mountains for several nights of seclusion and prayer, he later reported that it was there at age 40 that he received his first revelation from God. 3 years after this event, Muhammad started preaching these revelations, publicly proclaiming that God is one, that complete surrender to him is the only way acceptable to God, and that he himself was a prophet and messenger of God. In the same vein as other Islamic prophets, Muhammad gained few followers early on, and was met with hostility from some Meccan tribes. To escape persecution, Muhammad sent some of his followers to Abyssinia before he and his followers in Mecca migrated to Medina, which was known then as Yathrib, in the year 622. This event, the Hijra, marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar, which is known as the Hijra calendar. In Medina, Muhammad united the tribes under the constitution of Medina. After 8 years of fighting with the Meccan tribes, his followers, who by then had grown to 10,000, took control of Mecca in the largely peaceful conquest of Mecca. He destroyed the pagan idols in the city, then sent his followers out to destroy all of the remaining pagan temples in eastern Arabia. In 632, a few months after returning to Medina from the farewell pilgrimage, Muhammad fell ill and died. By the time of his death, most of the Arabian Peninsula had converted to Islam, and he had united Arabia into a single Muslim religious polity. The revelations which Muhammad reported receiving until his death form the verses of the Quran regarded by Muslims as the Word of God, and around which the religion is based. Besides the Quran, Muhammad's life and traditions are also upheld by Muslims as the sources of Sharia law. They discuss Muhammad and other prophets of Islam with reverence, adding the phrase "peace be upon him" whenever their names are mentioned. While conceptions of Muhammad in medieval Christendom and pre-modern times were largely negative, appraisals in modern history have been far less so. Thank you, and back to you, Rachel and Stephanie.
Thank you, Alex, for that riveting piece.
Very, very riveting.
Hey, Rachel, I think there's something that you would like to tell the audience.
Funny you should say that, Stephanie. The rise of Islam is on the up and coming. The spread of Islam began when the Prophet Muhammad started preaching the revelation, claiming to have been visited by the angel Gabriel, who passed on messages to him from God. Muhammad believed he was in the same line of prophets as Jesus and Moses. It was not until Muhammad began insulting the pagan deities and insisting that pagan Arabs would burn in hell for worshipping false gods that he started receiving followers. Muhammad was ridiculed in public, and the slaves that followed him were beaten by their pagan masters. They fled from Mecca to Medina in 622 AD, where they were welcomed by the local Jewish and pagan tribes. In 624 AD, the Muslims attacked and defeated a heavily guarded merchant caravan and took many of the pagans captive. This incident is known as the Battle of Badr and considered the first major battle of Muslim conquest of Arabia. Over the next years, Muhammad continued his conquest in northern Medina and started wars with many pagan and Jewish tribes. Muhammad promised his followers eternal paradise in the afterlife for their contribution to his cause. In 630 AD, Muhammad conquered Mecca. For the next 2 years, he sent his tribes all over western Arabia to conquer the remaining pagan tribes. Muhammad died in 632 AD. After his death, the Muslims were led by a series of caliphs. Their job was to continue the aggressive expansion of Islam. Abu Bakr, Muhammad's father-in-law, was first to be appointed caliph. His job was to take over the two largest empires, the Byzantine Empire of the Mediterranean and the Sassanid Empire of Persia. Both these empires were in a weak state to begin with because of the constant wars between each other over the past century. Abu Bakr died in 634 AD. The next named caliph was Umar, who was the second converter of Islam after Muhammad, and had spent 17 years at his side. During his caliph, Muslim armies conquered almost the entire Middle East, including the Levant, Egypt, and most of Persia. The rest of Persia was conquered by the reigns of two subsequent Rashidun caliphs. During the Umayyad caliph, Muslim conquest began to slow down. When the Muslim armies reached Maghreb, they were met with stiff resistance. At this time, the control of this northwestern part of Africa was in the hands of the Byzantines. They controlled the coastal area of Carthage as well. The city of Carthage fell quite easily to the Muslims and then moved on to wage war with the Berbers. While fighting with them, the Byzantine king led a surprise attack against the Muslims to recapture Carthage. The Muslims were forced to retreat and regroup. In 698 AD, Carthage was recaptured a second time. The Muslims destroyed the city, just as the Romans did. The Muslims turned their attention back to the Berbers in 702 AD, being successful this time. Once all of North Africa was in Muslim control, they wasted no time crossing the Straits of Gibraltar. Muslims took control of the Visigoths, but were stopped by the Franks. This saved most of Europe from Muslim rule and remains Christian to this day. In just 100 years, Muhammad and his followers claimed all of Arabia and then expanded out and conquered as far west as Spain and as far east as Afghanistan. The Islamic Caliphate had become the largest empire the world had yet known, controlling some of the most important centers of civilization. From this point on, much of the Mediterranean history would be characterized by the struggles between the Christian and Islamic faiths, the Christian holding the north side of the Mediterranean and the Muslims the south side.
You know, Rachel, I've never heard the rise of Islam story quite like that, but I like it.
Thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate that. Wait, what's this? Breaking news! Here we have Sebas on site to tell us all about it.
Tyrant rulers, revolutions, civil wars. Today, we can get overwhelmed by hearing the repetitive brutality of conflict and violent religious debate in the Middle East. However, this isn't just a contemporary pattern. Since its rapid rise and spread, as Rachel told us, the Islamic Empire has been embroiled in the same cycle of internal conflict. That is what the Battle of the Zab means. The Battle of the Zab is this symbolic event that marks the beginning of a cycle of civil wars that has defined Arab world politics. It is an event of symbolic importance during the overthrow of the Umayyad regime in 750 AD. This rebellion is sometimes known as the Hashemiyya. The existing Umayyad ruling elite, although they followed and spread Islamic faith, faced widespread dissent throughout their century-long reign. This conflict goes back to the split of Islam into two factions, Shiites and Sunni. The rebellion was led by a clan claiming to be direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, and there is when religious doctrine comes into play. After this battle, the rebels quickly took control of the weakened Damascus, the Umayyads, center of the government in modern-day Syria. The rebellion left room for a relative minority to rise to power, giving birth to the Abbasid regime that lasted for about the next 3 centuries. The Abbasids displaced their center to the city of Baghdad in what is today Iraq.
Thanks for that, Sebas. Well, folks, if you looked up breaking news in the dictionary, that would be it.
Oh, yes, it would. Now on to our new yet very talented news anchor,
Rookie!
Rachel, Kyle.
Thank you, Rachel and Stephanie, for that pleasant introduction. I'm here to talk about the Crusades. The Crusades were religious military campaigns whose main goals were to invade a country, take it over, and enforce their new religion on them. Crusades lasted for nearly 2 centuries. The first crusade, launched by Pope Urban II, happened because Muslims had taken over Jerusalem and Christians wanted it back. It started off as a pilgrimage and turned into a holy war between Christians and Muslims. Ultimately, it would lead to Christians recapturing the Holy Land, Jerusalem. Many volunteered to fight in the Crusades because they were awarded many benefits for fighting. Those who fought in the Crusade did because they had committed sin, and as promised by the Pope, whoever volunteered would be guaranteed to go to heaven because they were fighting for God. Eternal glory was not the only reason many volunteered to fight. As well as being promised to go to heaven, those who joined the crusade also did not have to pay taxes and were protected by the church. The First Crusade then triggered many after it. Many of the crusades were battles between the Muslims, Christians, and even the Mongols towards the end for the Holy Land of Jerusalem. However, there were also several other crusades that took place in places like Acre and Tripoli. A positive thing from the crusades was that it caused trade to flourish in Europe. The need to raise, transport, and supply these large armies led to trade substantially increasing where these armies were traveling and where the battles actually took place. After 2 centuries of these holy battles, the need and want finally decreased, mainly because the Muslims had regained and held control over Jerusalem. This made Europe lose interest in the elusive goal of capturing the Holy Land and the want to keep paying taxes in Europe for the campaigns drastically dwindled, making it hard to have a successful crusade. Ultimately, the rise of Reformation and decline of papal authority put a complete end to the Crusades. Back to you.
Thank you, Kyle, for that ravishing report. Hey, Stephanie, I heard you have some great news about the printing press.
Oh, I do. Thank you, Rachel, for that wonderful introduction. Did you know that during the 15th century you could buy a book for just the price of just 1 penny? I wish that books were still that inexpensive when I'm buying my textbooks every semester. The inexpensive cost for books was a result of the invention of the printing press, but that's not when writing started. Sometime in the 2nd or 3rd century CE, Romans began to sew groups of folded paper sheets together and bind them between 2 wooden covers into a book-like form. Papyrus is a thin paper-like material produced from the pith of a papyrus plant. While papyrus was the most common writing surface, it also had several problematic qualities. For example, not only did it become brittle with age, it also rapidly deteriorated under the humid conditions that existed outside of the desert. In addition, most papyrus only grew in the Nile region of Egypt, which gave Egyptians almost complete control over this resource. Also, changes in the wording of the text occurred because they were transcribed by hand and were unable to be corrected. Since most of the papyrus was controlled by the Egyptians, they banned all exports of papyrus to Pergamum, located in Turkey. With the banning of papyrus came the invention of parchment or vellum in the 4th century. Parchment is a writing material made from the skins of cows, sheep, and goats. This type of writing material has its pros and cons. Parchment lasted longer under various conditions, could be written on both sides, and the ink could be erased by scraping, allowing it to be reused. However, the process to make parchment was expensive and very time-consuming. So let's jump to the middle of the 15th century. Johannes Gutenberg was the first man to demonstrate the possibility of a printing press. Gutenberg devised an alloy of lead, tin, and antimony that would melt at low temperature, cast well in the die, and is durable in the press. Gutenberg's printing press spread rapidly throughout Germany, France, England, and Spain. Before 1500s, some 2,500 European cities had acquired presses. The immediate effect of the printing press was to multiply the output and cut the cost of books. It made information available to a much larger segment of the population. Printing stimulated the literacy of lay people and provided a superior basis for scholarship and prevented the further corruption of text through hand copying. By giving all scholars the same text to work from, it made progress in critical academia and science faster and more reliable. So with the invention of the printing press, all of us are able to receive the best education that will continue to impact our lives every single day, even if textbooks cost an arm and a leg to buy. Thanks for tuning in tonight.
Signing off from the Wasserman Daily News. Stay classy, San Diego.
Rachel, we're in Alma.
Don't mess with my punchline.